Hello, dear friends. Today we'll continue exploring Otto Carius's memoirs. Don't forget to share your thoughts on this content and give this video a like. Well, let's get started. A speedy recovery in the hospital. Of all the many kind wishes from the front and from home, the letters that brought me the greatest joy were those that arrived at the hospital from my company. Among them, I particularly enjoyed the letters from my fatherly, caring friend, as our staff sergeant can rightly be called. Thanks to his letters, I was always up to date on what was happening in the company. Rieger wrote to my mother in a rather reserved tone when he could not say anything definite about my condition. He wanted to make sure that I had made it home alive. Later, we corresponded, and today it gives me great joy that my mother collected and preserved all the correspondence from that time. In the very first lines of the letter sent from the hospital to the company, I asked whether Kircher, Kramer, Goering, and Lineker had received the awards I had requested for them while I was still in the medical battalion. In his reply of September 5th, Rieger reported, "Goering, Kirchner, and Kramer have not yet been nominated for awards. There is no longer an officer in the company who will take on this task." I wrote to the battalion via return mail and received the following good news on November 17th. Sergeant Kirchner and Corporal Kramer have been awarded the Knight's Cross, and Senior Sergeant Goering has been awarded the German Gold Cross. The burden of worry has been lifted from your shoulders with the presentation of these awards. I am particularly proud that they have become the first junior officers in the battalion to be honored with these high awards. My recovery process went very quickly. The doctor concluded that the bones of my upper thigh had fused so completely during the 14 days of my medical evacuation that it would be impossible to achieve optimal leg length. However, despite this, I was still wearing a Thomas traction splint. What a nuisance. One morning, I received a letter with the return address of Section 5 of the Army High Command, also known as the War Decorations Section. It asked me to report on my mobility, specifically whether I could travel to Hitler's headquarters for the official presentation of my award, the Oak Leaves to the Knight's Cross. I replied with a request to have the award sent to me. The response was as follows. Since the Führer reserves the right to personally present the Oak Leaves, it is not possible to send the award via Army headquarters. As soon as you are ready to appear before the Führer in person, you must promptly report to the awards department of the Army High Command so that the appropriate order may be issued from there. The only thing that pleased me about these terse lines was a short, handwritten note on the back. With best wishes for a speedy recovery, Major Johann Meyer. That is how I learned that this man was still alive. We had wished him well at Nevel. In mid-September, I tried walking for the first time. However, walking on crutches is something one has to learn. I made this unpleasant discovery during my first outing. It was, of course, a forbidden escape to a certain place. Everyone longs to get to that place after being bedridden for a long time. Of course, I wanted to take my first step with my foot instead of using the crutches, and immediately fell, naturally, on my injured leg. My first thought was that the femur, which had caused me hellish pain, had broken again. But everything turned out all right. The orderly put me back in bed. Walking went better the next day. With the help of rigorous training, after 14 days, I was able to walk with 2 crutches. 2 weeks later, I was already walking with just 1 crutch. Then I sent a report stating that I was ready to depart. I couldn't wait to find out when I would be ordered to report to the Führer's headquarters. I wanted to get a feel for the atmosphere there, because for some time I had already begun to doubt that the war would end successfully. At the end of October, I was summoned to Salzburg, where I was to report to the local command and receive further instructions. The train ride was no longer such a simple matter. Our train didn't even arrive in Salzburg. The final stop was a small station on the outskirts, where I shaved to be ready for inspection. Suddenly, an air raid siren sounded. Everyone, except for 2 soldiers and me, rushed into the bomb shelter. From the open area, we watched the formation of bombers. They flew in tight formation on a direct course toward Munich, paying no attention to the numerous anti-aircraft guns. Their fire no longer had even a psychological effect. These guys soon returned, following the same route. Only one of the planes had strayed and was flying slightly lower. It looked like it was going to be shot down. We were, of course, already getting ready to watch it crash when the plane suddenly dropped its bombs no more than 100 meters in front of us. It was probably saving them for Salzburg. Soon, we were lying face down in the mud, and we got up cautiously. The bomber met a bad end. It was shot down by anti-aircraft fire and crashed into the mountains. But now my dress uniform looked as if I had just arrived from the front. My suspicions were confirmed at the city commandant's office. The Führer's headquarters was not in this area at all. It had been decided in advance that Himmler would present the award. His headquarters was located on the outskirts of Salzburg. Himmler was not merely the Führer of the SS. He was simultaneously the head of the entire police force, the Minister of the Interior, and the commander of the reserve army, that is, the reserve units of the army itself. All the officers were placed on a special train situated directly in front of the tunnel entrance, where it was driven during air raid alerts. I thought the guards would be more vigilant. 2 sentries were patrolling on either side of the train. They didn't even ask for our papers as we climbed the steps into the car. An army liaison officer with the rank of major took charge of me and directed me to a compartment in the guest car. He said there was no need for me to rush, since my meeting with Himmler would not take place for at least the next 2 days. He also said that the commander of the 1st Company of the 502nd Battalion, Oberleutnant Belter, had left the day before. He had been awarded the Oak Leaves 3 months after me and had also been here to receive his award. What a pity we didn't meet here. I never saw him again. Then I was a guest at headquarters. All the officers were happy whenever someone arrived, because then they were allowed to drink a bottle of schnapps prepared for distinguished guests. Himmler was very strict. He himself did not drink alcohol. And everyone, from lieutenant to general, had to peel their own potatoes for lunch. The major showed me around the train's private compartments. I was amazed at how many officers were housed in the cars. Of course, I was most interested in one question. What turn will the war take, and what do they think about it here? Movies showed many new types of weapons, jet planes and guided missiles for fighting aircraft. There were so many reports of volunteers expressing a desire to pilot missiles that only a few could be used for that purpose. I saw the reports about these volunteers with my own eyes. It was assumed that such missiles could shoot down several bombers at once. Other types on display included remote-controlled anti-aircraft shells, new types of poison gas, and new submarines that could not be detected by radar. There were also night vision devices for tanks and long-range bombers capable of reaching America. Nuclear fission was also demonstrated on a model. This process was beyond my understanding given my level of knowledge at the time. I was only able to grasp it while studying after the war. I also learned that heavy water was necessary for this process. As a result of the betrayal, our plant in Norway came under attack. Even 2 railroad cars carrying heavy water which could have been saved, were blown up. The cars had already been loaded onto a ferry that was supposed to transport them to Germany. It was said that this loss set us back by at least 2 years. Because of this, the eastern and western fronts had to be held back, preventing them from approaching the borders of Germany for at least a year. Of course, the details of the assassination attempt on Hitler on July 20, 1944, were also discussed. For me, the only resistance fighter, in the true sense of the word, was Count Stauffenberg. Initially an energetic frontline officer, he became acquainted with the actual situation of the war after his wounding and subsequent assignment to Hitler's headquarters. He decided to act and followed his convictions. It is perhaps worth noting that, of all the others, he was a battle-hardened front-line soldier who took up the cause and sacrificed himself for his convictions. He was among the most capable army officers of the General Staff. To top it all off, he was a wounded man who had lost his right arm, part of his left arm, and an eye. The fact that Count Stauffenberg did not join the resistance group until the very last moment clearly testifies to the indecision of all those other oppositionists who had been planning the assassination since 1938, but never found an executor. Over all those years, not a single person came forward who would simply raise a pistol and fire the decisive shot. Almost all of us, the frontline soldiers, believed that we were risking our lives for some greater good, that we would win the war, but no one knew for sure. The leaders of the resistance were not only convinced that their sacrifice would be made for the good of the fatherland, but they also knew that only the timely elimination of Hitler could save Germany. This is exactly what war survivors and biographers claim. Every soldier in the world is required to risk his life for his country during wartime. He must do so without asking whether he will sacrifice his life for a good and just cause, or even for one that promises success. Why, then, should we exempt members of the resistance from their obligation to act promptly and ruthlessly? After all, they knew that their efforts and sacrifices could have saved Germany only if they had acted in a timely manner. The failure to act, given this factor, remains incomprehensible to us, the frontline soldiers. What would have happened if Hitler had indeed been killed on July 20th, 1944? What hopes could the Germans have placed in these people, who, after so many years, did not know how to plan an attack on Hitler that simply had to succeed? The conspirators never learned to control the situation. In any case, as it turned out, the third party, which merely laughed, were the Allies. They never expressed a willingness to give guarantees to the leaders of the resistance. The hatred of the Western world, and the even more justified hatred of the Russians, was not directed solely at Hitler. It applied to the entire population of Germany as a whole. One need only consider the Yalta Agreement and the negotiations that led to it. Anyone who wants to start a revolution must stake everything on a single card. Either that, or they must abandon the uprising and join the ranks of the discontented and saboteurs who have existed, exist, and will exist in every state and under any regime. No true frontline soldier will accept, and rightly so, the fact that secret expressions of discontent and feigned sabotage are valued higher than risking one's life at the front. Especially because he sees how the survivors and those privy to the secrets of the resistance groups after 1945 often allow themselves to lose the modesty so characteristic of true idealists. Unfortunately, those who were executed after July 20th 1944, achieved nothing for their people. Many of them acted out of conviction. However, they in no way earned more recognition and respect than any soldier who fatally and quietly perished at the front for his homeland. The members of the resistance who met their deaths risked no more and no less, just as they lost no more and no less than those who fell in battle. They all gave their lives. A conversation with Heinrich Himmler. Finally, the moment came when I was to appear before Heinrich Himmler. The major emphasized once again that I should speak plainly, without beating around the bush. Himmler liked it when people openly expressed their opinions. I was to do exactly that during our conversation. The headquarters was located in the villa where Himmler lived when the train wasn't traveling. I had to hand over my briefcase for inspection at the entrance to the cottage. No one asked me for my pistol. Before letting me in, the SS officer briefly briefed me once more. As I already knew, Himmler was addressed simply as Reichsführer, not Herr Reichsführer. Furthermore, I had to tuck my cap under my arm before entering. This contrasted with the custom in the Wehrmacht, where we reported to our superiors while wearing our headgear. Everything had been clarified, and we could begin. I had no illusions after everything I'd heard about Himmler. We didn't feel any particular affection for the SS anyway, and there was nothing to be done about it. I reported succinctly. Oberleutnant Karius, commander of the 2nd Company of the 502nd Heavy Tank Battalion, has arrived, as ordered, following his recovery. However, it took some effort on my part to omit the customary, "I have the honor to report." I also had to make an effort not to address him in the third person, but simply to use the word you. Occasionally, force of habit got the better of me, especially during conversation after dinner. But I didn't let it get to me, because I asked everything that was on my mind. Himmler stood up. "On behalf of the Führer, I award you the oak leaves to the Knight's Cross, in accordance with the order of July 27, 1944. The Führer apologizes, as he has always personally presented the award until now. The Führer is overburdened with work. He has authorized me, as Chief of Staff of the Army Reserve, to present you with the oak leaves and to convey his best wishes, including a speedy and full recovery. I personally congratulate you sincerely and from the bottom of my heart. You can certainly be proud because you are the youngest in the entire army to have been awarded this honor." Himmler approached me, shook my hand, and handed me the oak leaves in a small box. Then he said in a friendly tone, "And now we'll go to lunch. The guests are probably already waiting. After lunch, we'll be able to talk in an informal setting." After a brief, military-style thank you, I put the small box in my breast pocket and walked out into the reception area. However, Himmler stood beside me and said, "My dear Karius, that won't do. I would still like to briefly introduce you as the new recipient. You should wear the award around your neck." He released the clasp that securely held the Knight's Cross on the ribbon and attached the oak leaves to it. Then he patted me on the chest and said, "Is this probably your own invention? I'll advise my subordinates to use the same method. Some of them also wear such a decoration around their necks." He was referring to the elastic strap from driving goggles. It fit comfortably around the neck, regardless of its thickness. It was especially practical to wear with a shirt. My first impression of this man, whom his opponents had nicknamed the bloodthirsty dog, turned out to be surprisingly favorable. I was no longer worried about the upcoming friendly conversation. Himmler and I walked into the dining room, where 15 to 20 people rose from their seats. I was introduced to the entire gathering and seated to Himmler's right. Soon, I had the opportunity to see that most of those present were generals, though there were a few men in civilian clothes. The conversation interested me greatly. 2 SS generals had been recalled from Yugoslavia to discuss additional measures that were to be taken there. It should be noted that the partisans in that country did not get along with one another. The old enmity between Serbs and Croats persisted and had long been exploited by our leadership. Therefore, we supplied the Croats with weapons. Now we wanted to mobilize them and use them for our own purposes. Several civilians were representatives of the military-industrial complex. In their view, the main problem that needed to be resolved as soon as possible and under any circumstances was the issue of air defense. This, of course, was understood by any ordinary person who is horrified at the sight of the destruction of our cities. I would have been happy to discuss this topic at greater length with these people, especially since only here could I find out whether there was still a chance of successfully ending the war. The wartime meal was modest. They served soup, followed by meatballs, vegetables, and potatoes. It should be noted that, out of respect for the guests, the potatoes were not in their skins, but peeled. For dessert, they brought canned pears. In any case, I wouldn't call it a sumptuous meal. After finishing the first course, I didn't want anything else. Himmler signaled to the orderlies, who were all SS sergeants, and personally added a serving to my plate. He was in a good mood and said, "Eat up, Karius. You don't look like someone who should be restricting his food intake. Quite the opposite. You need to gain weight. Otherwise, there's no way you'll be discharged from the hospital anytime soon." Drawing laughter from everyone present, he pointed to the general, who had put on a few extra pounds. "Karius, you'll have to gain at least half his weight." Himmler was wearing a plain gray uniform. He wore no insignia or decorations. I was struck by the fact that this man was considered so dangerous. I thought that probably anyone who has to maintain order in the country, behind the front lines during wartime, is unpopular because they are forced to act without compromise. Then coffee was served. Himmler took it with him to his office, where he resumed the official discussions. It should be noted that he did not smoke or drink alcohol. As an honored guest, I was allowed to take my time, enjoying my coffee and smoking a cigarette. Then came the momentous occasion when I engaged in a lengthy conversation with Heinrich Himmler. I will try to recount our conversation from memory as accurately as possible. Himmler's office looked modest. The room was very large, but nothing stuck in my memory except for an imposing desk. It stood in the far right corner, some distance from the wall. In the opposite corner was a row of comfortable armchairs. We settled into the armchairs around a small, round table. Later, I often recalled this conversation when people said it was impossible to get close to this big man of the Third Reich. For half an hour, I remained face to face with Himmler, sitting relaxed at the table with a pistol in its holster. Our informal conversation remains vivid in my memory even today. After a few friendly opening remarks, Himmler asked, "Oberleutnant Karius, do you believe that with the development of anti-tank weapons, tank forces will soon become obsolete?" I replied with complete candor, "Reichsführer, I do not share that opinion. You know that the Russians have long used anti-tank units. However, they were almost never able to do anything when our tanks operated together and covered one another. If infantry operated alongside them, the likelihood of anything happening to them is not high. The possibility of striking with a rocket-propelled anti-tank grenade launcher or similar weapons from a long distance is just as small. If the tank crews are on guard, the soldiers can fire such weapons only once. Our tank units successfully used this tactic against the British and Russians when they were moving with their hatches closed. However, our battalion lost only one tank when the same tactic was used against us. That was on the Neva. And that happened because of the incompetent use of a single Tiger. In addition, for our protection against infantry, we have a mortar in the turret that fires S-type mines. If necessary, it can be fired without leaving the turret, using a special mechanism. But I've never had to use it. Himmler listened attentively, then suddenly changed the subject. What do you think, upon returning home, about the mood of the people? You, of course, could not help but be impressed by everything you saw here. I felt not the slightest hesitation at this direct question, and quite frankly said what I thought about it. Reichsführer, there is not the slightest doubt that people have become quite anxious because of the terrible air raids. Everyone is waiting for a weapon to appear that can drive the terrifying enemy out of our airspace. After a moment's hesitation, I calmly continued. Many people, myself included, are repelled by the pompous speeches of certain party leaders who act as if the war has already been won and final victory is within our grasp. Now Himmler was looking at me intently. In my opinion, I continued without hesitation, our people have already shown that they are strong enough to know the truth. They already know that we must continue to work hard to turn the tide of war in our favor. Couldn't we arrange for experienced frontline generals to come to Germany from time to time and speak with the people? These men deserve more respect than party functionaries, who in fact know nothing about the situation at the front. For this reason, they only spout empty phrases, likely taken from higher circles. Will Himmler fly into a rage after I have described certain party functionaries to him in such a disparaging manner? Not at all. The Reichsführer SS replied quite calmly, I am aware of the suffering of our people. I am also aware that our new air defense must become an indispensable condition for our continued survival. In a relatively short time, we will be able to stop the Americans from flying in parade formation over us. Our new jet aircraft will soon be put into service. Tests have been conducted on new anti-aircraft missiles, some of them manned, others radio-controlled. You were just sitting at the table with the gentleman in charge of this. You are right, my dear Karius. Without comprehensive countermeasures against the bombings, we will not hold out for long, but the situation will soon change completely. At this, Himmler hesitated for a moment. A necessary condition for this, of course, must be the ability to hold our front lines at any cost for another year. We need this year to complete, without interference, the work on the weapon we are creating to stun the enemy. At these words, I recalled an old saying. The story is fresh, but hard to believe. Yet at the same time, a glimmer of hope dawned before me. Himmler continued. As for your criticism of the party leadership, I must also agree with that, Karius. You know yourself that the best men are fighting at the front. I simply could no longer condemn their request to go to the front as volunteers. When we win the war, and we must win it, we will quickly eliminate the abuses that currently reign here. We will replace incompetent people with those who have proven themselves in action. Unexpectedly, he changed the subject again. Wouldn't you like to join the SS? We're looking for young, proven men. In a few weeks, you could become a Hauptsturmführer. More than anything, I was far from wanting to part with my tank crew, so I replied immediately. No, Reichsführer. My conservative nature abhors changing sides. I only want to return to my former company. I also had no intention of engaging in active service. I believe that the rivalry between the Wehrmacht and the SS has so far had only negative consequences for everyone. We in the Army unreservedly acknowledge the great achievements of the SS at the front. But do not forget that the SS units have the best trained men and the best equipment. That is, they have always been in a privileged position. This has often generated animosity toward them in other units. Even this remark did not provoke any indignation in Himmler. As for your concern regarding the rivalry between the Wehrmacht and the SS, I can tell you today that efforts have been underway for some time to unite the two branches of the armed forces. It should be noted that these efforts have consistently failed due to the stubbornness of the Wehrmacht generals. Himmler's remarks pleased me because they proved that our generals were indeed showing greater resolve than was generally believed. The introduction after July 20th of the German salute, modeled on the Nazi one, always made me extremely uncomfortable. I hoped the generals would remain steadfast. The SS, after all, could have joined us, since we were, of course, the first. But there were many indications that the SS wanted to absorb the Wehrmacht. Himmler was already the chief of staff of the entire Army Reserve, which included all Wehrmacht units. In that capacity, he had just presented me with the oak leaves. Then Himmler began to speak of personal matters. Do you have any personal requests that I could grant? Perhaps for additional leave or something of that sort? I immediately asked him for a document stating that my service status be changed to return to active duty. I also asked to be sent immediately to my unit with the marching battalion. Himmler smiled disapprovingly. That won't happen, my dear Karius. I cannot allow you to return to the front for the next 2 months. You cannot kill yourself before the war is over. You must regain your strength over the next few weeks or months in the reserve battalion. There is still enough time for you to return to your unit in the spring. You frontline soldiers always demand highly trained reinforcements, but you never think about training a few men yourselves. After some minor mutual concessions, I finally managed to get something in writing. In this document, I was deemed fit to return to duty on January 1st, if I so desired, and was to be immediately transferred to my former company unless I wished otherwise. Later, I made quite effective use of this document. Our conversation was coming to an end. Himmler asked if I was familiar with Salzburg and its surroundings. When I replied in the negative, he kindly placed a car and driver at my disposal. As we parted, he extended his hand to me and said, "If you ever encounter any difficulties, wherever you may be, please do not hesitate to write to me. You may contact me at any time." With these words, he took his leave. I have described my meeting with Heinrich Himmler in such detail because he truly surprised me. After our conversation at his headquarters, I began to harbor some hope for a successful conclusion to the war. This was after I had already considered defeat inevitable. Regardless of one's attitude toward the Third Reich, the truth demands that these people be portrayed as they truly were. Himmler provided me with a car for a short trip. The driver showed me some wonderful places. He took me to Berchtesgaden to the tea house, which everyone called the Eagle's Nest. He also showed me the Obersalzberg. I would also have gladly visited my father, who was serving on the border with Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, I couldn't locate him, and only found out after the war that I had been just 3 days' journey away from him. For me, meeting him then would have been the greatest joy. Throughout the entire time I lived on the special train, both before and after my award ceremony, reports coming in from the front were constantly being discussed. The commander of the 4th SS Panzer Corps, General Gill, called quite often. His corps had been assigned to reinforce the northern sector of the Eastern Front and was currently in reserve. Of course, all of this was extremely interesting to me. We discovered that the Russians had concentrated large forces in this area with which they intended to launch a major offensive. It later culminated in the capture of Berlin. Thanks to the Western powers, who graciously waited to allow the Russians to take advantage of honorable terms of surrender. However, Hitler did little to live up to the title of Supreme Commander. In any case, his directives were more than ill-advised. For example, he withdrew tank divisions from the northern sector shortly before the Russian offensive and transferred them to the south, where we intended to launch our own offensive. According to Hitler's plan, this offensive was supposed to force the Russians to pull some of their forces south, thereby fragmenting their strength. But they did not do us this favor. The days when the Russians fell for such a maneuver were long gone. Unfortunately, they knew exactly what position we were in. In any case, the divisions were sent south with orders to attack immediately. As a result, this only played into the Russians' hands. In some cases, the infantry attacked first without tanks. In others, the opposite occurred. Our offensive in the south was repelled, and the divisions were largely scattered. Contrary to all strategic and operational directives, General Gill's corps had to remain in the front-line zone. Thus, his corps could not be transferred to the area of the Russian breakthrough. His units were routed at the start of the Russian offensive and forced into a general, disorderly retreat. Thus, they were unable to influence the situation. Had the requests of Gill and other commanders been granted, they proposed withdrawing the corps even further to the rear as a reserve. These well-armed troops could certainly have stopped the Russians. After that, it became impossible to halt their advance. By January, the vanguard of Russian tanks had already appeared at the gates of Kustrin. By that time, I had familiarized myself with the area around Salzburg and was awaiting my return to the hospital. 3 days later, 2 SS officers who were planning to travel to Berlin took me along with them. I was glad to have saved the time I would have spent on a long train ride. It was also wonderful that I had the opportunity to drive up to the Armed Forces Personnel Administration building in Berlin. I would have to deal with the train later. On the way from Salzburg to Berlin via Munich, I learned to appreciate the car radio, which I usually paid no attention to at all. And all because we were able to learn from the reports where enemy planes flying at low altitudes had been spotted. Only thanks to this were some able to avoid encountering them. As soon as low-flying planes were reported, we would drive under a highway bridge and wait until they disappeared from view. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye for now, everyone. See you next time.